Luxury store manager kicks out. Johnny Depp, stunned when his identity is revealed. Celeste stood there, her pulse quickening, as she tried to keep her composure. Johnny Depp. The very name sent ripples through her mind. Yet the man standing before her didn't seem to match the star she had seen on the big screen. His voice, now soft but carrying an undeniable weight, lingered in the air. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm certain you don't want to be the one who kicked out a man like me from a store like this." His words were like daggers, sharp and unsettling. Celeste's breath hitched. She had always prided herself on being unshakable, on keeping the store's reputation intact at all costs. But something about this man, his voice, his presence, was testing her resolve in a way she wasn't prepared for. She swallowed hard. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private establishment. We uphold certain standards." Johnny Depp's eyes narrowed, a spark of amusement flashing across his face, as if he were playing some sort of game. "Standards," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Perhaps. But standards aren't meant to keep out the truly exceptional, are they?" Celeste could feel the tension building. She didn't want to back down, not in front of her staff, not in front of the customers who were already staring at the exchange. But she had no choice. This was a luxury store, and the last thing she could allow was for it to be associated with any kind of scandal, even if the man standing in front of her claimed to be one of the most famous actors in the world. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you'll need to leave now," Celeste repeated, her voice now laced with firmness. Johnny Depp took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He wasn't just standing there. He was now in her personal space. His gaze locked onto hers, and the intensity of his presence seemed to fill the room, pressing down on her. The other customers had begun to whisper among themselves, sensing something unusual happening. But none of them dared to intervene. They, too, seemed captivated by the strange energy between Celeste and this man. Then, as if sensing her growing unease, Johnny spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" Celeste felt a chill run down her spine at the implications of his words. She had handled celebrities, high-profile clients, and even the most difficult customers without ever breaking a sweat. But this man, if it truly was Johnny Depp, was different. There was something about him that made her feel like she was in the presence of someone far beyond her ability to control. Celeste began, but before she could finish, there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Without warning, Johnny reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device. He pressed a button, and the store's lights dimmed for just a fraction of a second before returning to their full brightness. It was enough to make Celeste's heart skip a beat. "Do you know what this is?" Johnny asked, holding up the device. Celeste's eyes narrowed, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. "What is this supposed to be?" "It's something that ensures no one, not even you, can erase what's happening here today," he replied, his voice calm but filled with an underlying threat. Celeste's gaze flickered between the device and Johnny's face, trying to read him, trying to understand what was happening. She had no idea whether he was being serious, whether this was all a joke, or whether something more dangerous was at play. "You'll regret this," Johnny said softly, almost as if he were warning her. Her thoughts were in turmoil. She had heard rumors about celebrities like him, their eccentricities and power, but never had she imagined one could walk into her store and completely dismantle everything she thought she knew about her job. But Celeste was not one to give up easily. She took a deep breath and regained her composure. "I don't care who you are," she said, her voice a mixture of defiance and calm. "If you don't leave right now, I'll have security remove you." At that moment, the doors to the store swung open with a sudden gust of wind, and a figure stepped inside. It was a man dressed in a sharp suit, his posture stiff and formal. He walked with an air of authority, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Johnny. Celeste's eyes widened as she recognized him. He was one of the store's regular security guards, but there was something different about him now. He wasn't walking toward her as expected. Instead, he was heading straight for Johnny Depp. The room grew tense. Johnny glanced at the guard, his lips curling into a smile. "You should know, Celeste," he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet, dangerous amusement. "This man, he doesn't work for you anymore." Celeste's eyes darted from Johnny to the security guard. Her heart began to race as she realized what he was implying. But before she could say anything, the guard stopped in his tracks. "You're right," the guard said, his voice almost mechanical. "I don't work for her. I work for Mr. Depp now." Celeste's stomach dropped. This was no longer about a luxury store dispute. It was about something much deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. Johnny turned his gaze back to her, his expression unreadable. "I think it's time for you to consider a different approach to this situation." Celeste was speechless. The man she had dismissed so easily had somehow flipped the power dynamic in an instant. The room seemed to close in on her as she struggled to process what was happening. The walls of the boutique felt like they were closing in, as if the weight of the situation was pressing down on her chest. Johnny didn't wait for her to speak. Instead, he stepped back, motioning for the guard to follow him. "I'll be leaving now, but know this, Celeste. You'll see me again soon." With that, he turned, his long coat swishing as he walked out the door, followed closely by the security guard. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Celeste stood frozen in the center of the boutique, the entire store eerily silent. It took a few seconds before her staff began to whisper among themselves, but no one dared approach her. She had never felt so exposed, so powerless in her own domain. Finally, Celeste's legs gave way, and she slumped into a chair by the counter, her mind racing to catch up with the events that had just unfolded. She had confronted a man she thought was an imposter, only to realize she had underestimated him in the most dangerous way. Johnny Depp had walked into her store, and in the blink of an eye, everything had changed.